Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us again on our COVID-19 workplace safety Q&A sessions. This is our third installment. Today, we're going to focus a little bit more on restaurants and bars and keep pushing this concept that we talk about on getting open and staying open. We just really have to make sure that as we move forward through the COVID crisis, that we're all focused on this same goal, that we're trying to get our economy open in the safest way possible. The science is certainly going to dictate what that looks like and when. We did pretty good with the stay home, stay safe order, getting our numbers down. They kind of started creeping back up, as we've all seen, and we've known that the governor has told us over and over that that sliding scale moves in both directions, and she has made some moves to tighten up some of the things that could be open and things we could be doing. So we all need to commit to taking some ownership with the spread of COVID, doing our part, masking up, and pushing forward to make sure that we get open and stay open. So we know, and I've mentioned before, and I like to start the top with it, that some of the science is telling us that about 40% of those that are spreading COVID are either asymptomatic, meaning they'll never get sick, or pre-symptomatic, meaning they currently feel fine. And that's why these masks become so important, is that they can help cut the transmission of the virus by some estimates up to about 70%. And we can see that we're safest when we're staying at home, practically no risk at all. And we're most at risk when none of us are wearing these face coverings, which is why we have Executive Order 153, which requires all of us in Michigan to wear a face covering when we're outdoors and cannot maintain 6 feet of social distance, or when we're indoors in a public space. So you've seen and heard the Mask Up Michigan campaign. The Department of Health and Human Services is putting out a lot of great information for you and for all of us to understand and wear the face coverings to make sure that we protect not only ourselves and our loved ones, but we protect our economy and our communities. We got to keep pushing forward. The social distancing, the masks, the washing your hands have stayed consistent throughout this crisis, and these are the keys to making sure we keep moving forward in Michigan. So today we're going to focus a bit on restaurant and bars, and we're going to start off with a great little clip that our communications team and our good friend that's helping us put this together, Mike Snyder, put together with some of the requirements for restaurants and bars and indoor spaces.
For food service employees and their employers, there are new ways to work safely to help reduce the spread of COVID-19. Designate one or more worksite supervisors to implement, monitor, and report on the COVID-19 preparedness and response plan. Develop daily entry screening protocol for employees and contractors. Display a door or sidewalk sign with the services available, instructions for pickup, and hours of operation. Reserve parking spaces near the front door for curbside pickup only. Limit capacity to 50% of normal seating. Require 6 feet of separation between parties or groups at different tables or bar tops. Close waiting areas and ask customers to wait in cars for a call when their table is ready. Create or post communication materials for customers, including instructing customers to wear a face covering or mask until they are seated. Close self-serve food or drink options, such as buffets, salad bars, and drink stations. Require hosts and servers to wear face coverings. Food preparers should wear face coverings and gloves in the kitchen area when handling food. Install physical barriers such as sneeze guards and partitions at cash registers, bars, host stands, and other areas where maintaining physical distance of 6 feet is difficult. Provide physical guides such as tape on floors or sidewalks and signage on walls to ensure that customers remain at least 6 feet apart in any lines. Limit number of employees in shared spaces. For additional resources, visit michigan.gov/MIOSHA.
So some of the expectations from the state that you have all been seeing in the news, as well as in the executive orders, are that restaurants and bars and all employers are following the executive orders. Today we're talking about restaurant and bars, but certainly there are obligations for other types of employers too, that you're putting forth a good faith effort to adhere to these guidelines. You're training employees on safe practices and other things. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot in the restaurant and bar space specifically, make sure you are doing those daily health screenings of employees coming to work. And keeping track of how that's going. So this video that you just watched with us is just one of the many materials we have available at michigan.gov COVID workplace safety. We have posters, more of those videos. We have fact sheets specific to the restaurant and bar industry, and there are other guidelines there that you're going to want to pay attention to. These guidelines are built around the executive orders and the CDC requirements for the type of establishment. So you'll definitely want to make sure that you have a good awareness of those and are using those. A few examples of the posters that we have available for businesses to use on the site are the ones you see here and more, including some of the capacity requirements and other things that you're required to do in the restaurant and bar space. For questions we may not get to today or questions that you have in general from both employers and employees, you can call into a hotline that the MIOSHA team developed specifically for COVID questions. That's 855-SAFE-C19 or 855-723-3219. For employers that might be on with us today, MIOSHA recently launched the Michigan COVID Workplace Safety Grants. These are matching grants of up to $10,000 to purchase PPE, engineering controls, and other needs related to COVID in the workplace. This is specific to workplace safety and protecting employees. This could be physical barriers, hand sanitizer, ventilation system changes, you name it. The grant period opened on Monday, July 27th. It's going to close on Friday, August 7th. You can apply right through a link on that same website, michigan.gov/COVID workplace safety. The application and criteria are listed there for you. There's a lot of other great websites, and many of these are linked to our Michigan COVID Workplace Safety website. The MEDC Peer Michigan Business Connect has a platform that you can connect with Michigan manufacturers to purchase PPE and other supplies. The My Symptoms app for that daily health screening allows employers to set up an employer-specific account. You'll get a number, you give that to your employees, and they can use that for the questionnaire portion of the health screening. You can go to Safe Start to check out the Safe Start plan, and then certainly at michigan.gov Mask Up, there's some social media and posters and other information there that you can use as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and as we have been, we get into the question and answer period. One thing I'd like to say right off the bat is I got a question after the last one. So what happens to the questions that you don't answer? Our wonderful communications team is actually keeping track of all of those, and we try to pick up where we left off. Because today we're focusing on restaurants and bars, we're going to hone in on those questions a little bit more, but we will get back to them. Some of the questions may have been answered in previous clips. These videos are available on our YouTube, so make sure you check those out for some questions. And as always, call that 855-SAFE-C19. I did have a question come in from a restaurant owner that related to deliveries being dropped off, noticing that in his restaurant and a couple of others around him, the delivery drivers were not wearing their face coverings when they went in to deliver those goods. You need to be wearing those face coverings. We can't stress that enough. These face coverings are one of the key tools that we're all going to be able to use to keep our economy open and make sure our numbers stay low. If our numbers continue to increase, certainly, as I mentioned, that Safe Start plan moves in both directions, and we don't want to go back there. You don't want to go back there, so we need to make it happen. Few things, we have seen outbreaks in workplaces, but we're seeing a lot of these spikes come from things that we do on our own, like our backyard barbecues and backyard parties. So keep in mind that just because we're talking a lot about workplace, these are not the places that are just the only places that there's a risk of COVID transmission. We need to be thinking about it in our daily lives as well. So with that, I will stop talking for now and let Erica get into the Q&As.
All right, thanks for all that great information, Sean. Our first question is from anonymous guest here, and they are asking, do employers need to document the check-ins each day and keep them on file?
Absolutely, they should be keeping a record of that for a few reasons. One is that if we get into a situation where you have a positive, the Department of Health and Human Service will work with you to do some contact tracing to find out if there are other people exposed to that. So we need to know, and you need to know, who was in the workplace and what types of symptoms they may have had at that time, as well as if there were a complaint that you weren't doing the health screening, that would be one of the things that'd be asked for is your log of the health screening itself.
Perfect. And can employers use a self-check-in sheet that the employee would sign rather than having a screener at the door?
Yeah, you can use a paper form. I would absolutely recommend that if you're going to try to do that, you consider the My Symptoms app, because it'll cover the same questionnaire questions like types of symptoms and things. Employers will get a report of that. We are developing a portal to go along with that, so you can get real-time data. For now, what employee will get a green or an orange. A green means they don't have any of the symptoms, and orange means that they flagged for a couple and probably should not be in the workplace at that time. They'd want to log that.
All right, and Joe asks, we have a liquor and food license. Do we need to abide by the 10 or less number, or do we qualify for the 50% capacity?
So restaurants and bars follow the 50% capacity. Now, we know that bars that have more of their revenue or gross receipts of 70% or more coming from alcohol sales are not allowed to be open right now. But if you're under that threshold, you can be open, but you're following the seating capacity limits that are included in Executive Order 161.
Perfect. And this is another capacity question, this one coming in from Jennifer. Is it 10 people or 50% capacity? Can the bar restaurant owner be sued if someone contracts COVID-19 while at the establishment? She has a couple more questions here, but I'll let you start with those two.
It's for restaurants and bars, it's 50% capacity. On the legal advice, I apologize, but I can't give you legal advice on that. I'd suggest you consult your attorney.
All right, and Jennifer goes on to ask, do masks or face shields have to be worn at all times by the employees?
Yes, both in Executive Order 161, which set the workplace safeguards, and the masking requirement. Indoor public spaces, you're wearing a face covering at all times. Customers that are at your restaurant can remove them once they're seated.
All right, and one last question here from Jennifer. Are OSHA representatives really going around undercover to every establishment to monitor the compliance?
There is nothing undercover about it. The answer is not to every establishment. These are spot inspections randomly chosen. They are not undercover. They will announce themselves that they are MIOSHA, that they are there as part of our state emphasis program to review what you're doing in your workplace, which will include potentially reviewing your preparedness and response plan. But there's nothing underhanded or it's not, they're not like undercover police. They will make sure that you know they are there.
All right, and where do banquet halls and weddings fall in this order?
They are banquet hall, they're not allowed to be open right now. Potentially in region 6 and 8, I would have to review that off the top of my head, but yes.
Okay. We have another capacity question here from Michelle, but she's asking, is it 10 people or 50% capacity for one group? If they're all sitting at tables that 4 or 5 people throughout the space, is this okay?
Could you repeat the last part? I didn't really catch that.
Sure. So I think what she's asking is the capacity based on your entire establishment or for groups? She says,
I understand.
If they're all sitting at a table and there's 4 or 5 people throughout the space, is that okay?
4 or 5 people throughout the space would probably be fine. What you want to avoid is, and we understand this, right? Like, so you can't have an event with people from not from the same household with 10 or more, right? An event like that can happen in a restaurant. So if I'm trying to have like a bridal shower or something and I need 15 people to come in, that's not something you're going to be able to do. With the seating capacity, you need to be able to maintain social distancing and all of that kind of stuff.
Perfect. And in regards to bars, is the new executive order basically the same as the order that was in place prior to Memorial Day weekend in regions 6 and 8? If not, what is the difference?
So bars across the state of Michigan are not allowed to be open if 70% or more of their gross receipts come from alcohol sales. So if you fall into that category, you're not going to be open right now under the executive order.
All right, and another question from an anonymous guest says, our kitchen employees work in a hot environment. Are there any other acceptable substitutes for face masks without a doctor recommendation letter, such as face shields?
Under the executive order, the face masks or coverings are required to be worn at all times while kitchen staff are preparing food and otherwise, and in indoor public spaces, they need to be worn at all times as well. A face shield is not equivalent as it relates to COVID containment as a face mask. So yes, they would need to wear those, recognizing that it's hot and it can be miserable, but yes.
All right, here's another one related to banquet halls. Our facility was told that we could continue to operate as a restaurant since we can follow all the same guidelines as a restaurant or bar. We charge a fee for our meals, can socially distance tables, our staff wear masks and gloves and serve the food, and guests would be instructed to wear masks until they are at their tables and when moving around, etc. Can we continue to operate and hold functions the same as a restaurant as long as we follow the same guidelines?
That would sound like an event, and an event with 10 or more people is not allowed.
All right, and this next question says, how many persons per table if they come in together?
I would recommend that you not exceed 10. And you still need to be able to make sure that that grouping can maintain social distance from the other tables.
Perfect. And can a restaurant or bar have live music or karaoke?
That is a very good question, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head, and I don't want to give one without looking into it. What I would suggest to everybody paying attention is that we are literally doing this live, so I have not been able to script these questions out or anything else. So please let us put that one in the to be answered column. Perfect.
Thanks, Sean. This one, just to reiterate, another question about kitchens. Kitchens are hot, and are face shields acceptable?
No, you'd need to be wearing the face coverings. Now, certainly last week we talked about certain ADA issues, right? So if you have somebody that has a request a reasonable accommodation under the ADA, the employer would need to engage with them, and there may be alternatives, but the executive order is quite clear that face masks are required in the kitchen while you're preparing food.
Yeah, and I think this one is along the same lines again, but Chris is asking, if there's an exception for those who have a medical condition preventing the cloth covering. So this is specific to a bartender. If they have a medical condition, can they wear the plastic face shield instead?
Well, I think when somebody requests a reasonable accommodation as an employer, you're going to need to look at the type of work they're doing, whether whatever accommodation you're making creates a greater hazard for them, or in the case of COVID, if it creates a greater hazard for the people that you're trying to serve in a bar or a restaurant. So to be clear, a face shield does not provide the same level of respiratory protection. So as I've discussed before, this primarily spreads from aerosols and large respiratory droplets that, either we cough, sneeze, talk, sing loud, or whatever are coming from us. And a face shield is not containing as much of that potential virus as a face covering. So those are a couple of things as the employer. For a bartender, perhaps that person could be moved to some different type of work where a face shield would be sufficient, where they're going to be more than 6 feet away from everybody, and those types of things. But in an indoor public space, you're going to want to evaluate that really closely.
All right. This is an interesting one from Jennifer. Are we allowed to call police if someone refuses to wear a mask?
So I don't know if Jennifer is speaking from inside the establishment as the management. So as we know, Executive Order 153 on the masking requirements requires businesses to require masks to come in for service, or else they have to deny service. So if a person comes in without a face covering, you have your sign up that says it's required. You have somebody say, you know, face mask required. If the person refuses, you ask them to leave. Yes, absolutely. It becomes a trespass issue, not a face mask issue. A business can always ask somebody to leave their premises, and if they refuse, it becomes a trespass situation.
All right, and we have another question in from Joe, who had a question about capacity earlier, and I should note that he's listed himself, it looks like perhaps the employer at a place called the Comedy Project, but he's saying, to clarify, as a restaurant or bar with far less than 70% of revenue from a bar operating at 50% capacity, can a performance of any kind be happening in our space with proper social distancing?
We'll have that. We will get back to you on that one. I believe I have the answer, but I want to be clear on the answer before I give an answer, so I apologize.
Perfect. All right. And can you have more than 10 people seated at the same table for outside seating?
I think what we'd want to think about there is, how are we going to maintain that social distance? You know, we have some requirements in Executive Order 160 that prohibit us from having gatherings of 10 or more. And that's not just if you're going to the restaurant, that's whatever it is you're doing. So, you know, if you're going beyond that 10 person there, you know, you're really pushing the limits of what Executive Order 160 is telling us that we need to be doing.
All right. Looks like this question is related to a bar. If your capacity is 200 people, so 100 people at 50%, but you have 50 chairs spread apart for social distance, how many people are allowed to enter?
This sounds like a 7th grade story problem here. Let me map this out. So it's 50% of your seating capacity. Now I know that depending on the type of venue you are, the fire marshal will give you an maximum occupancy. What you're going to need to look at is actually your floor, your seating capacity, your floor capacity. So it's not just that you could fit 200 people in there and be within compliance with the fire code. It's how can you seat people and maintain that type of social distancing. So when you look at how your business or your bar or your restaurant's aligned, that's going to dictate more about how many people can be in there than just being able to give you a straight math answer.
All right, this question comes in from Caroline. Are children included in the 10-person limit for indoor events?
Yes.
And the next question asks, could a worker in a kitchen wear a battery-operated neck fan to keep themselves cool?
Sounded like you cut off, Erica. I don't know if you got muted, but
sorry about that. They just wanted to know if they can use a battery-operated neck fan to keep themselves cool.
So the CDC has some guidance on manufacturing that deals with fans and some other things. I would want to check there for restaurant. One of the things with the manufacturing was that if they are fixed fans, you know, make sure that they're not blowing on other employees or things like that. Off the top of my head, I can see that as probably not being an issue, but you'd want to make sure that you're wearing your face covering, that it fits tightly enough that you're not just kind of making it irrelevant, and that whatever you're blowing behind you is not going directly on the person that's right next to you and that kind of thing. So I would say, take a look at it, but be careful, and let's circle back to the CDC guidance to see if there's any input there.
All right. If someone says they can't wear the mask, what do you do?
Are you talking about an employee or a customer? So from an employee perspective, That's going to be a request for a reasonable accommodation. You're going to need to evaluate the type of work that they do and see if there's other work available, if there's an other safety mechanism available, if you can separate them further. Restaurants and bars, that's going to be more challenging depending on what it is that person does. If they're engaging with the public, it becomes more of a challenge. If they're a customer that's trying to come in and says, I'm unable to wear the mask, similar situation, that you need to be able and ready to provide a reasonable accommodation. You can ask them certain questions. You obviously don't want to get overly descriptive, but you can say, if they say I'm medically unable, say, you can offer a face shield potentially. You can offer curbside service. You can offer, if it's a grocery store as an example, to have somebody shop for them. And you can do some things that way, but it's not you need to ask the questions, because that's part of the good faith effort, right? That is there a different way that I can accommodate your need?
Perfect. Let's see. We have an anonymous question that says, is the 6-foot distancing in addition to the 50% capacity? With 6-foot distancing, I can only see 25% based on my square footage.
Yes, it's in addition to, yes.
All right, and this one is saying, can a restaurant have a rehearsal dinner of 50 if everyone has a mask?
No.
All right. Joe is asking about it looks like a group event. We are open at 50% seating capacity of 100 people, but I have a group of 80 people coming in on Sunday. I will not allow anyone else to come in, and the tables will be socially distanced. Thoughts?
I would suggest that they call the MyOSHA folks to talk through that further. And a couple of those other questions about like our seating and stuff. Keep in mind, we have that wonderful group at MyOSHA, the consultation team and others, 855-SAFE-C19. When sometimes when we're doing the Q&A, some of these get pretty specific about like my workplace. They will absolutely talk with you about your workplace and things that you could or should or need to be doing. So these questions are perfect to go there.
Well, that's a pretty good segue to end things for this live event.
Oh, wow.
Before I do that, I do have one last question from Bob. I think we've touched on this already, but in case he joined us after it was answered, Bob's asking, since we have outside seating, can we have a group of 20 if separate tables are used, less than 10 per table, and they wear masks when not at their table?
So the outdoor seating is to also get that, it's basically getting you extra square footage to add some tables. So you need to be at 50% capacity with 6 feet of social distance between them. If if your seating is structured that way, you can fill up the tables.
Perfect. And that's all the time we have for Q&A. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Sean?
No, I think great questions. Like I said, these aren't scripted. Erica's getting a measure, putting them in, and I'm trying to answer them the best that I can. So keep checking COVID Workplace Safety for updates. It's the greatest tool that we have, where we're going to keep plugging information, new flyers, there's fact sheets there, everything you need. Think about this in the sense of, like I mentioned, all of us taking some ownership to get open and stay open. And when we're looking at these rules, I understand fully that businesses need to operate and that working people need to work, and that we're looking, let's not just look at like the minimum compliance that we can do. Let's make sure we're looking at this in a way that ensures that our numbers stay low and we in fact get open and stay open.